Good morning. Welcome back to Passionate Road Radio Network. Distinguish yourself from the ordinary. And this morning, from the International Miami Book Fair, our first author up for interview is LawrenceLevy, who wrote 2 books, but the one we're talking about this morning is Brooklyn on Fire. So, good morning, Lawrence. How are you today?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good, considering one thing and another. So what made you decide to create a character as the first female detective in Brooklyn?
Well, she was a real person, actually. Back in the late 19th century, the Brooklyn Police Department hired a young woman, 24 years old, her name was Mary Handley, to sleuth a high-profile murder when there were no policewomen back then. I'm sure hoping for her to fail, because a lot of women were pushing to be noticed at that time, because they didn't have as, I mean, not that everything is equal today, but it was worse back then. And they were looking to push them to hire policewomen, and she wound up solving the case and finding the murderer. So that was the genesis of my first book, Second Street Station. I married it with Edison and Tesla in the fight over the electricity market and the early marketing of Coca-Cola, and cocaine, which was considered the cure-all at that time, was very well accepted. And then the second book has to do with the annexation of Brooklyn by New York City and the scandal around it. It's called Brooklyn on Fire. And it also involves some of the luminaries of the day, like Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, and Collis Huntington, and some deep, dark secrets that those families were hiding, and also the Vanderbilt family too. So it's a fun book. It's Mary sleuthing murders in the middle of real history as to what was happening at that time, and real stories about these people.
And I think those kind of books are really exciting, because a lot of Americans really don't learn about the inner history of any of our cities.
Well, you know, it's funny. I was born in Brooklyn, and I did not know that it was the 4th largest city in the United States before it was annexed by Manhattan. I thought that was pretty interesting, and one of the reasons Manhattan, New York, wanted to annex Brooklyn was that they were concerned that Chicago would wind up being the bigger city and therefore get more of the port business. So it's kind of interesting, and there's a huge scandal around that too. So
well, New York is full of scandals if you really pry into some of the things. I know I'm also a New Yorker, and we used to be taken down to the docks a lot and pointed out with the ships and everything else. But there's a lot of history in those streets, because those were the first streets that a lot of the immigrants hit.
I agree, and you know, as a matter of fact, the 3rd book I'm writing now has a lot to do with immigrants and immigration and the way they were treated. But that's not out yet.
We won't go there. That's okay.
It's you know, what happened with me, basically, just to give you a little background, is I've been a television writer my whole career, and I wrote for Seinfeld, Roseanne, Family Ties, Facts of Life, Saved by the Bell, Seventh Heaven, Trapper John NB, you name it, I wrote for it. I won the Writers Guild Award for Seinfeld and was nominated for a couple of Emmys. And what happened was I started reading some history when my son was doing a term paper, and I got interested in the Edison-Tesla fight over the electricity market.
Yes.
And I said, gee, wouldn't this be interesting to be told in the context of a real murder that happened at the time? And that's when I came across Mary Handley and the murder that she had to sleuth, and she basically took over the book and the series, and they're in it, but they're secondary characters. She's the star, really, and everybody loves Mary. And I was very, very fortunate. I sent it out, got a book agent pretty quickly, and in no time I had 4 publishers bidding for it, and I wound up going with Random House, Crown, Broadway Books. Everything's a conglomerate today, so I have to name it all.
That's true. Actually, it's called a monopoly, and I think there are just three publishing companies left, and that's it.
It's pretty sad.
Yes,
it is.
It is.
You know. You have to. I studied at Cornell Industrial Labor Relations, so I'm very well aware of all that kind of stuff. And here I am. You know, I didn't go into it, obviously.
But that's okay. My father went to Cornell at 14, so.
At 14?
He was a near genius, as they had a full photographic memory.
Wow.
And when he went through, he was told he was the brightest young man that they had ever accepted to come in. But he said he was too young. He said academia was a breeze. Maturity for him was devastating. He said the only fun part is that when he was in chemistry, all the chemists' hands were stained different colors. So when they were dancing with the girls at the proms at the end of the years, you would see an assortment of color clutching their dates.
The old, the psychedelic look started then. But it's funny because my dad also, he was accepted to Cornell, and he couldn't go because he had to support his mother.
Yeah.
So I mean, he was so happy when I got accepted because he couldn't do it and I could. So it was a warm feeling. It was very nice.
Have you ever caught a glimpse of The Artful Detective? It's a Canadian program, and it has the detective in the early 1900s, only it's set in Canada. And the gentleman is an inventor of things to come, but they mix it in with history. And they also did one on Tesla and Edison, which was very interesting. So people may draw a parallel between your series.
Well, I mean, Edison and Tesla are just in the first book, but one thing I found interesting about Tesla, that he wound up crazy. When he died in 1943, he wound up crazy in a hotel room thinking he could talk to pigeons. That's how crazy he wound up being after everything that was done to him and his inventions. I thought that was fascinating for such a genius.
Well, we talked to the dolphins and their clicks.
But he thought that the pigeons had a
talking
language of talking back to him.
Oh, okay.
That's a little different.
That's a little, yes, that's true. That's true. Who was telling me? Oh, the biologist I was speaking to was telling me that when humpback whales see that the orcas are attacking a sea lion, that the humpback whales will flip themselves over, get the sea lion, put them on their stomach, and prevent the orcas from eating the sea lion.
Wow, that's tremendous.
Can you imagine doing a series with something like that? I thought that was pretty awesome because I was telling him that the orcas have learned that if you flip great whites over and put them on their back, they become immobilized. And that's how they kill them. And he says, I never heard that. And I said, well, see, one up on you. But I think it's interesting when people write mysteries or multicultural books or paranormal books or whatever, and they put history in there, because I think it gives a more sense of identity to the characters that you're creating.
Well, what I try to do is make it very truthful. I mean, there are a lot of real facts down in Brooklyn on Fire, down to the family scandal of one of the elite of New York. That's true. I mean, they were hiding this. It came out later, but the point is they were hiding this to try and be accepted to proper society then. And so obviously they become one of the suspects in the murder case that she's in, because they're desperately trying to hide this secret. And what's fascinating is that it all relates to today, because the robber barons of the late 19th century were the 1% of the day that we talk about today.
Yes.
And the people, a lot of the people, there was a slight middle class, but there were a lot of people who were living in dire poverty, who were slaves in these to the corporations of these people who were making tons of money. It isn't quite as bad as that today, but we're heading in that direction.
We are heading in that direction.
And we should learn from that history. And what eventually happened was Teddy Roosevelt got in there and started to bust up some of these corporations. The muckrakers got in there and got them to clean up the products they were putting out, and then eventually unions. And unfortunately, unions are not very powerful today. They're in decline.
They're in decline. They're being broken up. When they put that Fair Labor Act law in, all of a sudden unions were a dirty word, and people had the right now to drop out of them without getting into trouble.
Right, and also I know everybody loves Ronald Reagan, but when he fired the air traffic controllers in the 1980s saying, I can just get rid of a union, I'm going to fire them all, it was open season on unions after that. And, you know, look, yes, did they exceed their power sometimes? Yes, they did. I understand that. But there's got to be some level of control there between the working man and the corporate heads. I mean, now corporate heads are making ungodly amounts of money from the stock options that they're given and stuff like
And
that.
their golden parachutes.
And their golden parachutes. So I mean, the point is, there's got to be some measure of checks and balances there. And of course, well, I don't want to get into the new election, but with the new election, there's
we can talk
certainly
about
won't
that
be.
the next time,
Yes.
because I have a few things to say about that myself. So
Okay,
that's
good.
fine. Because I know that when I write paranormal multicultural books for tweens, and I try to always put some history in so people understand that this is just a nameless book. That's what's happened in this history of whatever state or country
Right.
I'm in. It's going to affect how the characters are going to act and interact. You can't get away from that.
You know, there's no question about it. I mean, it's life. It's what's happening now. And you try to, as a writer, at least myself, I try to make it very lifelike. And that's how I write, that's how I was taught. I also try and make it entertaining, which is to me important. It's, you know, the way I write my books is the way I like to read books. And I'm not going to sit there and write 4 pages describing a dresser when you walk into a room. You know, even if it's important, a few sentences is enough. You want to keep the story moving.
Yes.
And you want the people to think, well, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? It's like, it's not the same thing, but it's kind of like when you're a father or a mother and telling your child a bedtime story, and they say, and what's happening next, Daddy? And what's happening next?
Yeah,
and
you know,
you want people, of course, in a much more mature way to have that feeling when they're reading something. Gee, this is interesting. I wonder what's going to happen next.
I understand.
You know?
Moby Dick and Great Expectations put me off.
Yeah. It's all that description.
All that description and that one sentence that stretched for 4 pages. And now when I have to read authors' books that do something like that, I just throw it aside. Maybe the pace will pick up, but to me, I was taught, throw them into the middle of something, because that's the way life is.
Well,
You're
you know,
just one step away.
With Dickens and Melville, they were classics, and we were told they were classics, so
Yeah.
we got through them and found the gems inside.
Yes.
But just normal reading, you know, I mean, especially when you're a new author, I wouldn't, I can't deal with that. That's myself.
Well, I think that today's audience is a little more sophisticated than the audience with the classics. They were still coming out of the Great West. They were still coming out of the settlements that were coming west. States were becoming a city. Territories were becoming states. There's still a lot of unrest going on.
Also, it was
in our
almost,
culture.
besides, I mean, there was stage plays, but it was really the only form of entertainment, reading.
Yes.
It didn't have to compete with anything. Now we have 4,000 television channels and all these other things, and people are used to getting their entertainment a little more quickly.
And cheaply.
Yeah.
I mean, there weren't any real children's book written until some of Robert Louis Stevenson, Ruth Tarkington, T.H. White, and there's some of the others. But they weren't writing books for kids. They were writing books for adults.
You know, Robert Louis Stevenson, you know, to go back to Second Street Station, which is my first book, and I mentioned that cocaine was considered the cure-all. Queen Victoria, Thomas Edison, and a lot of people endorsed it and used it. Robert Louis Stevenson was another one.
Well, they didn't consider cocaine a deadly narcotic yet. They really thought it would be helpful to them to cure the elements. I don't know when Coca-Cola took cocaine out of their mix.
In the early 20th century, they replaced it with caffeine. But at first it was, I mean, the guy who invented it, who was in my first book, John Pemberton, he invented it as a fountain drink at drugstores because that's how they served them, and he was a pharmacist. and what he thought was Prohibition was coming. And he said, you know, and the most popular drink in the United States at the time was a wine called Vin Mariani, which was cocaine laced. And he said, when Prohibition comes and they can't drink that wine, I've got a soft drink that's cocaine laced. And this is going to make a lot of money. And he wound up making nothing on the thing. He wound up selling it for almost nothing, and then somebody got the idea to bottle it. And boom.
It went out.
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting. What did Pepsi ever use? Did they start with
I really don't know. I don't know when Pepsi started. I was following.
I'm just kind of curious because
Yeah.
Pepsi and Coke are pretty much the same thing as far as
No,
I'm
no, they are.
concerned.
But my guess is they started after Coke was out there already. I would assume so, because
Okay.
Coke was
I was
first.
just kind of curious.
Yeah.
So did you find a lot of help from turning your writing from the TV shows to writing a book? Was it the same type?
It's not the same type, but it was very helpful having been a television writer. First of all, television has breaks for commercials. They call them act breaks when you're writing the script. Novels have chapters,
Yes.
and you kind of want them to continue at the end of the chapter, be interested enough to go to the next chapter.
Right.
So in a way, whenever I could, I would gear my writing to that, where there was a nice little dip or a surprise at the end of a chapter to say, oh, that's interesting, what's next? You know, and so in that respect, there is some correlation. What I like more about novel writing is that, first of all, television is a group effort. And you write something, and then the actors have to perform it, and the director has to get a certain feel out of it. And it doesn't always turn out the way you had it in your mind, because either the actors have a different interpretation or the director has a different interpretation.
Right.
Sometimes it's better, but very often it's just not what you wanted. And in a book, you put down what the person is thinking, you put down what they're doing, and nobody's changing that. I mean, it's more of your creative effort
Right.
that goes down on paper. And I fell in love with the medium. After I wrote my first book, I just wanted to write more. When they offered me to write, it's now a 4-book series. I'll be writing 2 more, and I hope it goes on forever, because I love Mary. Everybody loves the character of Mary Hanley, a woman fighting against the odds in a time when women were suppressed, you know, and gutsy, self-educated. And so I would love to continue doing this as long as I can.
But that is your typical woman. She had to be gutsy. She has to be
Right.
self-educated, because they weren't sending
Right,
women
that-
to universities.
No, and they very often wouldn't sell them to regular public, you know, to regular schools, put them out to work as soon as they
As soon
could.
as possible.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, when my grandmother, she came, she immigrated to the United States somewhere in the early, it was before the crash, but not too long after. But she was telling me that there was just nothing for you. If she says, if you came from the wealthy class, that was something else. They may send you to university, but you were there mostly to catch a husband. You were not there really to educate yourself.
Right, it's to catch the right husband who will support
Would
you
you-
while you to provide him with children.
Yes, absolutely. And your life was
And
spiritual
so,
to
and
it.
I have Mary constantly fighting that, because that's what her mother wants her to do. She just wanted to have a career. And so that her mother and her are constantly butting heads about that.
Well, yes, well, I raised my son single-handed, and the whole time I was doing it, my mother says, it's time you got married. It's time you needed to get remarried. You can marry a rich man just as well as a poor man. Middle class would be nice, but it was always constant. Every Friday and Saturday night when I stay in to watch the shows that
Yeah.
you wrote, she would say to me, don't you have a date? Don't you want to go out? You know, my son is watching this exchange. He says, it's kind of like watching tennis. You never knew who was going to win that particular.
I'll tell you funny though, you know, when I was a teenager, my mother did say something similar to me, like, you can fall in love with a rich girl as much as you can fall in love with a poor, as well as you can fall in love with a
Really?
poor girl.
Oh, that makes me feel very good.
So I mean, it's mothers.
Yeah. I did that to my kid. I was so glad when he finally graduated from college. I went out and said, yes! And every parent looked at me and they said, why? I said, I raised him to leave home. Thank you. They were just so so
And
upset.
Today it's crazy because I'm very fortunate that I was able to make enough money so that when my children went through college, they don't come out with debt.
Right.
But the kids today are coming out with $100,000-$200,000 worth of debt. It's a mortgage that they come out of college with, and that's a shame. That's just a real. I mean, it's interesting. The school that my daughter went to, in the 10 years now since she graduated, the tuition is almost doubled. Now, inflation hasn't been that much. They don't pay the professors that much.
No.
Where's that money going to?
Administration, and the sports. Sports is a big deal. When we were living in...
But the sports, I mean, like, depends on what university it is, but there are sports teams like football and stuff like that that make a lot of money.
The football, I know. We used to live in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And for a high school, the stadium was more impressive than the ones that they had for the professional team. And I just went, whoa.
Well, that's a college town, too.
Yes, I know. I was really glad to be over there.
But I've lived in New York and LA. Those are the two places that I've lived in, and I've loved both places. So it's not as... Although LA is kind of a show business town, but it's not a one business town.
New York is multi-talented. It has a port city, so you have that coming in. You have the theater district. You have Wall Street. Well, maybe they'll start bringing the city back and let Wall Street hang out by itself.
Yeah. I mean, I was also fortunate in what I did with my TV background. I was able to get my book to a couple of TV luminaries like Larry David and Matt Weiner from Mad Men, and they read the book and really liked it and wrote nice things about it. So
it helps.
It helps. You got to get out there and promote.
You have to get out there and promote. You don't need me to tell you how you go about doing it. The more you go out and promote and market it, but it's your writing that's going to substantiate everything you do.
In the end, that's it. All you can do is get people to take a look at it, and then if they like it, hopefully they'll tell somebody else.
Absolutely. So do you plan to make a movie out of it?
Well, it's interesting because Warner Brothers optioned it, and for a TV series, actually. And I was with them for a while, and at first, Hollywood. They tell you everything you want to hear. They tell you, well, you're going to do it the way you want to do it. And then all of a sudden they changed their minds. And I said, look, I've been at this long enough. I've made so many compromises over the years as a television writer. I don't want to compromise my series. Thank you. Goodbye.
Yes.
And I'm sure they all thought I was crazy, and maybe I was, but I really want to do justice to this. I don't want to turn it into some... See, one of the things that I gave Mary is that she learned jiu-jitsu to protect herself because she lived in a tough neighborhood, and she had kids who made fun of her because she was intellectually disposed. So she learned that. So you could easily turn that into a jiu-jitsu hell of a woman story, and I don't want to do that. I want her to be a really intelligent young lady who is pursuing something. You
want her to be human.
Yes,
you don't want her to be endowed with supernatural powers.
I don't want a cartoon.
No.
Which is very popular today, and that's nice, but that's not what she is.
You want her to be who she is, and it's very difficult sometimes. I've come across it with some publishing companies who wanted me to change my characters, and I said, I wrote my characters the way I wrote them, and I'm not going to change the color of their skin to get them published.
Yeah.
Sorry. And they said, anybody would do that. And I said, but I'm not anybody. I spent 5 years writing this book. And if you think I'm going to change it now, it's not going to happen. And they are not used to that. They're used to a lot of authors and screenwriters saying, oh, yes, anything to be on the big screen. And to me, that's not the purpose of why I write a book.
Yeah, the point is, I understand the cooperative effort, and like for years as a television writer, I was very cooperative in helping. And, one of the gimmicks is making them think you've made the changes when you really haven't.
Yeah.
That's one of the things you try to pull, especially in television. But in this particular case, it was just so drastic that, it reminds me of a story that I read about the screenwriter who wrote In the Line of Fire. You know that movie with Clint Eastwood?
Yes.
Well, this guy was starving, and he wrote this script, and he was called in. They were going to buy it 20 years ago or 30 years ago, whenever it came out, for like $250,000, which was a lot of money back then. It's still a lot of money today, but I mean, it was huge back then. And he went in for the talk with the executive, and the executive said, well, we want to get Tom Cruise to play this role. And he said, Tom Cruise? How could he have been old enough to have been Kennedy's bodyguard, which is the whole emotional thread of the film.
Yes.
He didn't protect Kennedy, so he felt terrible today that the president might be killed, and he had to protect him.
Right.
And he said, well, how would he be old enough to have been Kennedy's bodyguard? He says, oh, we'll have to lose all of that. It was the heart of the film.
Yes.
And he went home to his wife, and he discussed it with him, and she said, we'll get a lot of money, but they're going to ruin it. And she said, do what you want, follow your heart. And he did, and as it turned out, he was lucky enough to get Clint Eastwood, and the film that was made was a very good film. But I mean, sometimes it never happens.
Yeah.
That's it, that's your one shot, you don't get another one. So, I mean, those are decisions you have to make.
It's a small world, but sometimes you have to stand up for what's right.
I agree. I agree.
So, Lawrence, tell everybody where they can find you for today, if you're on any panels or you're doing any signings.
Okay. Well, actually, I'm doing a signing. I'm doing a panel very shortly at 11 o'clock a.m. in Building 201, and I'll be on that panel. I'll be talking about my book, Brooklyn on Fire, a little bit about Second Street Station, my first book, and doing a reading, and then a signing afterwards. So that will. I will do that today. My books are available. Both books are available here at the fair. I see it out there.
Isn't that nice? I'll brag to everybody where they can find you on the World Wide Web.
And you know, you can get me on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Random House. My my own personal website is www.LawrenceLevy.com, and you can buy books through that, through Random House. It's again a Random House Crown Broadway book, and you can get it on Kindle. You can get it on Nook. You know, it should be easy to find. Second Street Station and Brooklyn on Fire.
Thank you all very much for listening, or in this point viewing at Facebook Live. Our special guest from the International Miami Book Fair, LawrenceLevy. And you can see this all over again at facebook.com/PWR Network LLC, facebook.com/groups/PWR Talk Network. You can also find it at twitter.com/@Cauldwell, CAULDWELL, and at the website https://PassionateWorldRadioNetwork.com. And remember, distinguish yourself from the ordinary.